everyone. Thank you for attending the 20th IIOA webinar. And today we are very honored to have Professor Sangwon Suh from, he's a chair professor at Tsinghua University now. He's an active member of the working groups that develop international standards on LCA and carbon accounting, including Greenhouse Gas Protocol Standard, Science-Based Target Initiative, and the International Organizations for Standardization. He's internationally recognized for his contribution to LCA and IIOA and the corporate carbon accounting. His research has advantaged the methodological foundation of supply chain emissions accounting and their application policy and practice. And today, Professor Sangwon will discuss his experience and thoughts from MRIO to corporate climate action to bridge the academic models and the industry practice. Okay, floor is yours, Sangwon.
Great. Thank you, Jing, for the introduction. Let me share the screen. All right. Do you see the screen now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So it's my pleasure to present at the IIOA webinar, and IIOA is one of those organizations I feel very much at home. I grew with IIOA. I learned from IIOA, all the colleagues that participated today. I see Eric Disenbacher, and Colin Webb, and many of my colleagues and friends here. I'm very much, this is my kind of home base. I feel very grateful to be part of this community and be able to present today. So today, my talk is really about sharing my experience more than anything else. So I will not be able to present anything new, and there is no groundbreaking scientific discovery in input analysis that I will be presenting today. So for those who were expecting me to present something extremely new, please, be disappointed today. So today, my talk will be about my experience about using multi-regional input-output models for corporate carbon accounting. And we do have a bit of different angle in the use of MRIOs in academic setting and the corporate setting. And I would like to share some of my experiences from the private sector. Some of you may know that I have been in academia for a long time, and over the last 3 years or so, I worked for a private company, Watershed, which is Silicon Valley software as a service company. It's a Silicon Valley tech company that develops the software tool for large enterprises for their greenhouse gas emissions management. So the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions that Watershed manages is about 7% of the global total emissions. It's fairly sizable amount of global greenhouse gas emissions that Watershed is managing. So it manages 3-figure companies' greenhouse gas emissions. They are all very large companies, global companies. And I learned a lot from that experience. And the main database that we have been using for the corporate carbon accounting at Watershed was MRIO. So my experience will be primarily based on that experience. Okay, so to begin, the goal here is to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and avoid disastrous consequences of climate change. As we all know, greenhouse gas emissions are rising, and we need to bring it down to net zero by 2050. So we have to balance the emissions to the planet's ability to absorb them by mid-century in order to limit the global average temperature rise from the pre-industrial average within the 2 degrees Celsius or possibly 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in order for us to do that, as you can see, that we need to follow this blue trajectory. So 1.5 degree limit will need to follow a very steep decline in greenhouse gas emissions in the next decades or so. And they will require consolidated actions from multiple different sectors. And that is what these companies, including Silicon Valley tech companies like Watershed and many other companies that are involved in the private sector, are trying to achieve. And big part of that is what is called Scope 3. So Scope 3 is a very much practical jargon by the standard community and corporate carbon accounting community. And we, from the academic setting, we generally don't use the term Scope 3 very much. So let me just explain very briefly what Scope 3 means. So in the greenhouse gas protocol, which is one of the most widely used international standard for carbon accounting for corporate setting, is actually the most widely used international standard. And as many of you know, that there are kind of dual global standard currently, which is that on the one hand, we have ISO standard, International Organization for Standardization, and then on the other hand, we have greenhouse gas protocol standards. And ISO standard is basically post-World War II structure. And that after the World War II, there has been a lot of needs for standardizing some of the manufactured goods, because that's when the import and export international trade started to play an important role at a global economy. And they found that standardization is needed in order for those manufactured goods to be utilized by different countries. And that was really the main body of international standardization. And ISO 14000 series was the environmental management standard, under which we have ISO 14060 series, where we have a greenhouse gas accounting. And that was the more traditional and more orthodox international standardization practice. But then around the year 2000, corporate communities were not very happy with the ISO regime, because ISO is very much like a UN conference, where each country has one vote. And there is very limited access by the corporate community to influence the outcome of the international standardization. So that's the birth of the new era in international standardization with the greenhouse gas protocol. So greenhouse gas protocol was launched by two international organizations. One was the WRI, World Resources Institute, based in Washington, D.C., and the other one was WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, that is headquartered in Geneva. That is very much a corporate community. And they come together to develop a corporate-driven international standard, and that resulted in corporate standard as well as product standard and project standard. And interestingly enough, very recently there has been an effort to harmonize the ISO and the greenhouse gas protocol standard. So now new set of working groups have been launched to harmonize the two. So I personally have been working for the greenhouse gas protocol for its first version for corporate standard, and again the revision of it from year 2023. But now I'm joining the joint working group between ISO and greenhouse gas protocol on ISO 14067. So these are the international standard kind of landscape, and there the scope 3 is about the upstream and downstream greenhouse gas emissions. So at the center, what you're seeing is the direct emissions from companies, and then indirect emissions by the purchased electricity and heat. And these are the core of the greenhouse gas emissions that the companies are responsible for. And then what is upstream, mainly purchased goods and services, and downstream, the use of sold product. These are the main source of emissions for corporate settings. So especially for our purposes, purchased goods and services, which is called category 1 of scope 3, is the main use of MRIO. So how companies are using MRIO data? So imagine that you are building a corporate greenhouse gas emissions inventory of large corporations like Walmart. Walmart makes purchases of millions of products, literally, and quantifying the greenhouse gas emissions of those purchased goods and services, which is category 1 of scope 3, is a nightmare, as you can imagine. One way to do that is to look into the life cycle assessment databases for the goods and services that a company purchases and match those individual line items with life cycle inventories and generate the greenhouse gas emissions embodied in those purchased goods and services. Another approach, which is more popular and maybe it may come as a surprise to many of us, the most popular approach in corporate carbon accounting for scope 3 category 1 is to use input-output data set. And that is when I say it is surprising, that is because many of us actually don't know how widely input-output data is being utilized by corporate communities. When you look at the CDP, CDP is the UK-based investor-backed carbon disclosure platform, and it is largest largest one of such kind. And according to CDP, about 70% of the companies that are disclosing scope 3 uses input-output data set. So input-output data set is very close, near and dear to our corporate community, more than we may know. So there you can use the input-output data set by mapping your corporate purchase ledger, each and every publicly traded companies. Even if it is not publicly traded, you need to have your corporate ledger. And in the corporate ledger, you need to list what are the purchased goods and services per each fiscal year. And we are mapping that line item to the input-output categories, and the input-output categories per dollar. We do know what are the greenhouse gas emissions per dollar by different databases out there. You can name like IIOA database, Excel-based database, and we developed a CETA database, and now we have a Cornerstone, the most widely used one according to CDP reported corporate disclosures. It is a US IIO database. So these are the input-output data set that companies are using. There are 3 main areas where these corporate data sets the input-output data sets are used by corporates. One is, mapping those purchase items to input-output data sets so that they can understand what is the supply chain structure. And then secondly, they can also map it in such a way that they can see what are the greenhouse gas emission hotspots in their purchases. And then they can also generate the footprint based on these mapping results. So this has been one of the most wide applications of input-output data set by the corporate users. But interestingly enough, in recent discussions, the standardization community turned very cold against the input-output data set. So let me kind of explain why that's the case. So at the beginning of the corporate greenhouse gas protocol standardization practice, input-output data set was actually the only option the companies were not prepared to do anything more than input-output-based scope 3.1, scope 3 category 1. But now situation has changed a bit. So now we have AI, widely used and quite extensive use of process LCA is becoming increasingly possible. And in addition to that, there is a bit of skepticism because of the intermodal variability. What I mean by that is that on the right-hand side, when you use one model versus another, you get very different result. And in many cases, the different results are legitimate because these are both based on plausible modeling choices by our academic developers of these input-output models or compilers of the environmentally extended input-output models. However, from the user point of view, the variability in the result between different models are clear sign that there is something wrong. And another one is the good and old aggregation error problem. So input-output data sets are by necessity aggregated to varying extent, and that is for some applications, like for example pharmaceuticals. They use variety of different chemicals, and if all of them are categorized under one category, which is organic chemicals, then, well, it's very difficult to distinguish between different sources and different chemicals that they are using. So the aggregation error is another source of skepticism by the standardization community. The third one is a price heterogeneity, and this is, again, classic issue that we are facing, and especially in recent years, we are seeing a high fluctuation of prices due to the pandemic and afterwards with the war. And this high price fluctuation sometimes is very difficult for companies to cope with when it comes to the monetary unit-based measures like input-output emissions factors. So among them, what I think it is the most important kind of lesson that I learned from my experience in corporate was about the importance of consistency and the limit and the ability to limit the variability. What I mean by that is this. So from the academic researcher point of view, whenever there is a new cutting edge approach, we want to use it. We want to be innovative and we want to be original. So we want to test the new idea and new methodology to my new MRIO result. And obviously that result in the somewhat different number than my previous version. And from the academic point of view, that's a very desirable direction as we want to innovate and we want to pursue the original contributions to the literature. But from the corporate point of view, this is not very welcome because what they want is to be able to have a year-over-year comparison of their results so that they can track the improvement that they are making, and they want to produce reproducible results so that they can understand what has been the effect of the measures that they have been taking. So if the emissions factors from the MRIO results are changing year over year, then obviously they are not able to make consistent year-over-year comparisons. And this became quite a bit of problem, especially when we are updating the input-output tables. And as we all know, all the MRIO databases have been undergoing rapid development. So our OECD colleagues are here. So we all use IIOA database or Figaro database. All these MRIOs are improving year over year, which is great for us. But from the end user point of view, those fluctuations and variabilities are often unwelcome. So one question is how can we pursue those innovation. Obviously, this is very important for us. We need to improve the ways in which we make these data sets available, but at the same time, maintain consistency over time is very important. So it's not only about the intermodal variability, but also within a model, it is an intertemporal variability due to the adoption of new data sets and method that is also very important. So if I can think of this as a kind of 2x2 framework, it is looking more like this. So on the horizontal axis, we have year-over-year reproducibility and stability. And on the vertical axis, we have a theoretical sophistication and novelty. And academic frontier may be sitting more here, which has a low year-over-year reproducibility and stability, but very high theoretical sophistication novelty. And then if we are interested in just complying with the standard and make sure that our year-over-year results are comparable, then it will be somewhere on the lower right, which is about rigid compliance and it's about stability, not much about innovation. I think what companies, corporate users are looking for is somewhat on the upper right side, which is harmonized practice where we have the scientific rigor. At the same time, we have stability and reproducibility. And obviously, we don't want to be on the lower left by any means. And that also speaks to the importance of hybrid analysis. So hybrid analysis means that, well, we can think about two different hybrid framework. One is a hybrid unit framework, which is that by using, for example, kilowatt hour instead of dollar for electricity row, we can make the input-output table a little bit more immune to the price fluctuations, for example. So that is one type of hybridization. Another type of hybridization that is more, the LC practitioners are more familiar with is the hybridization between process LC and input-output LC. And that overcomes the aggregation error problem. So this hybrid framework would be beneficial in overcoming those two issues that we discussed as a kind of source of skepticism by the standardization community. To that we go toward that direction. Recently, some of you may know that we created the harmonized version between USCIO and CEDA. That there was a Cornerstone Sustainability Data Initiative. I don't know whether our colleagues from Watershed or Cornerstone is present today here, but the Wes Ingerson from EPA, formerly at EPA, who led the team of scientists to develop a USCIO, are working with the CEDA team, Mo Lee, my former colleague at Watershed, and we are harmonizing USCIO and CEDA and make that openly accessible to the general public. So this type of effort, harmonization effort, is very much welcome and aligned with the kind of expectations from the corporate world. Right. So this is again the hybridization story. We want to benefit from the methodological framework such as hybrid framework so that we overcome some of these problems. And this hybrid framework has been there for a long time, since even 1970s when the energy analysis was very popular due to the oil embargo. There is nothing, I would say, methodologically new under the sun on the hybrid analysis, and it's very well established framework. So it's there for us to utilize and benefit from. Another thing that I would like to mention to especially to this audience is this. So as the user of input-output analysis, we understand some of the strength of input-output analysis very well. much more than the members of the International Standardization Committee, who are more users. In many cases, they are more users of these factors, and they have never developed any input-output data set or LCA data set in many cases. But the thing is that the challenges I'm facing is that unless we can bring some published evidence, the argument becomes like he said versus she said kind of argument, and it's very difficult to make a strong case for the input-output method. So one example is this. So input-output analysis has been attacked by unfortunately, many of the members of the committee in recent standardization effort. And I want to bring some of the cases like, for example, when you compare the raw data set needed for corporate carbon accounting between process approach versus input-output approach. So if you are following process approach, the raw data that you are bringing in is things like bill of materials. But bill of materials, there is no standard. If you ask one engineer, what is the bill of materials for your product, he will come up with something. And if you ask another engineer will come up with something else with different nomenclature, different system boundaries. So very little standardization is there in bill of materials, whereas the purchase ledger is much more standard and the system boundary is much more consistent. Therefore, in my view,
if 1 lakh rupees, and if I in the morning I spent the 5,000 rupees.
So Preeti, can you mute yourself? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so in my view, the use of input-output analysis and the general ledger ensures consistent system boundary of the raw data set. So, but when I try to bring this type of issues to the committee, what committee needs is evidence. Is there a published literature talking about this? Is there empirical evidence that the use of input-output analysis through the purchase ledger provide more consistency? Well, the answer is no. Very little has been done on this type of questions because there has been general separation between more academic applications of input-output analysis versus practical applications of input-output analysis answering this type of questions. So I think that we want to bring this two worlds together, and they are very fertile research questions that we can contribute to if we bring this together. So I hope that we can answer many of these pressing questions from the corporate application side with our wealth of knowledge in input-output analysis going forward through that kind of collaboration. Right. So what I'm learning, what I learned, and also I'm learning is that when it comes to the input-output analysis and its application, there are I'm seeing there are three different kind of pillars that we want to think about. By the way, I would like to include our input-output developers within academia. OECD, for example, or JRC is not exactly academia, but I think that we act more like an academia. And then there is a standardization body, and then there is a private sector. The standardization is serving a very important role because private sector practice is governed through the standards. So private sector wants to have standard because they want to compare apples to apples. Their corporate accounting results should be comparable to their competitors' corporate accounting result. Therefore, they want to follow standards. So that standards are mediating many of the accounting practices that are practiced by the private sector. And So those three pillars are all very important, and obviously there is a overlapping part that should be credible, transparent, reproducible decision, useful accounting. So by sharing experiences together with our private practitioners and the standard developers, standard setters, as well as academic community, I think that we can probably reach this more credible, transparent, reproducible, decision useful accounting framework. Yeah, I think it is a bit of repetition, thanks to my notebook LM, who may sometimes do that. So the path forward, I hope that is more harmonization, and obviously input-output analysis and MRIO is indispensable, even with all the criticisms and skepticisms by the international standardization communities that we are seeing recently. I do not think that the use of input-output analysis and MRIO is going anywhere, because if you really look at the what data that is available out there, there aren't a lot of choices. So I hope that we can achieve this harmonization going forward and to the next level. So with that, I would like to, conclude, and I'll entertain any questions from you.
Okay, thank you, Sangwon, for sharing your insights and experience. So any questions?